Thank you, Mr. President, for sitting down with NBC News. We'd like to start with the security situation and get your perspective as to where the security situation is in Afghanistan at the moment, and if the Afghan forces will be able to take on the lead of the security for the country by 2014.
Right. Well, with regard to security in Afghanistan, it is relatively better this year. In terms of the attacks on our forces and our people. But it isn't what the Afghan people want. It isn't satisfactory. We still have tens of our people dying almost every day in mine blasts and IED attacks and in similar other attacks. So if we speak comparatively, we are doing better than last year and the year before, but it isn't satisfactory, and we are not yet sure if this is a trend that will keep improving. On the question of the readiness, the preparedness of the Afghan security forces, they are quite ready, I can say with confidence, to handle the security of the country, the threats to this country, on their own, and to receive the full transition of authority to them in 2014 rather than 2013, and to have the departure of the foreign forces from Afghanistan completed in 2014.
So who would you say is behind the insecurity? Is it Al-Qaeda, is it the Taliban, or is it someone else?
Well, the name Taliban has been used very often. There's no doubt that some of the attacks are done by the Taliban. There's also no doubt that in many instances this trademark name, the Taliban, is used by all sorts of players. Al-Qaeda, I don't think has a presence in Afghanistan. I don't even know if Al-Qaeda exists as an organization as it is being spoken about. So all we know is that we have insecurity. Part of the insecurity is definitely coming to us from terrorism and the attacks of the Taliban. Part of the insecurity is coming to us from the structures that NATO and America created in Afghanistan. The private security firms, the contractors that they promoted at the cost of the Afghan people, and the way they behaved with the Afghan people and the anger that has caused in the Afghan people, and the resulting insecurity.
So, from what I'm gathering, some of these private security companies are also behind the insecurity here in Afghanistan. In fact, when we look at provinces like Logar and Wardak that border the capital province of Kabul, there's much insecurity in those provinces. And I've heard from some Afghan officials that they say that it's actually NATO and the international community who's behind the insecurity in those provinces and not necessarily the Taliban. Would you say that's a correct statement?
No doubt that the province of Maidan Wardak is very much insecure. The people there are under constant threat of insecurity. And there is, for a number of years now, a growing perception in Afghanistan that a significant part of insecurity in Afghanistan is caused by the way the United States and some of its allies promoted lawlessness in Afghanistan by spreading corruption in Afghanistan, by employing private security firms who became a law on their own, who became a force responsible to nobody, and who behaved exactly as tanks and militias. There were also contracts and contractors for oil supplies and all other supplies who were ridden with corruption, who bribed people along the way, and who, through causing corruption, brought us insecurity. In addition to the suspicion that people have that some of the attacks in the name of the Taliban are actually those who are trained, or rather unleashed by the international forces in Afghanistan. That perception is strong, and it's countrywide.
So would you say you believe that some of these would be intentional insecurity brought by NATO and the United States?
There is a very strong perception that some of that insecurity is intentional, yes.
Last spring, you, along with President Obama, signed a bilateral agreement, a strategic partnership with the United States and Afghanistan beyond 2014. You also decided within the year you would sign a security agreement. I'd like to know where you are in that process of a security agreement. From what I understand, it's been halted because of the Bagram detainee transfer situation.
Yes. We signed a strategic partnership agreement with the United States in order to end a phase in Afghanistan, a phase of violation of Afghan sovereignty, a violation of Afghan security by international forces, a violation of Afghan homes and their sanctity by the international forces, and to change this relationship with the international community who came to us here in the name of the fight against terrorism, or in the name of a resolution by the United Nations. So we entered into the strategic partnership with America in order to begin a new chapter. That new chapter, ma'am, didn't come to us as was envisaged in the partnership between Afghanistan and the United States. In that, there is clear commitment by the United States to the sovereignty of Afghanistan, to the respect of Afghan laws, and to ending practices that have caused anger in the Afghan people. Attacks on Afghan homes, taking prisoners in Afghanistan, and keeping prisoners in Afghanistan. And we had a separate agreement also with the United States, a memorandum of understanding by which the United States committed not to keep prisoners or take prisoners. That did not come about. That agreement was not put in practice. The promises were not fulfilled. So we are yet to resolve that, and that has become an issue of unhappiness for us with the way agreements are violated and not treated with respect.
You also signed a security agreement. From my understanding, it has come to a halt because of the Bagram detainee situation. Mm-hmm. Can you explain where you are right now in that security agreement?
Well, I'll go first to the strategic partnership agreement. We signed the strategic partnership agreement with the expectation and the hope that after signing the strategic partnership agreement, the nature of the United States activities in Afghanistan would change. We, as you know, began to believe nearly 5-6 years ago that the war on terror is not in Afghanistan. That by attacking Afghan villages and Afghan homes, you cannot defeat terrorism because that's not where it is. And rather than concentrating on the sanctuaries, Afghans paid a heavy price in this war. So we began to work with the United States and our other allies to change this, to bring a shift. Signing the partnership of strategic relations was the method for us to bring a change from that approach in which the Afghans paid a heavy price to a relationship in which the United States would have presence in Afghanistan, but would change its behavior and would respect Afghan sovereignty. Now that was signed. The Afghan people backed it, and we are happy that we have signed that. The second phase in that is to be the signing of a security agreement between Afghanistan and the United States. Talks are going on. We have not yet ordered a halt to negotiations on this, but we have raised issues with the United States because the agreement, the memorandum of understanding between us and the United States on the United States not taking prisoners in Afghanistan and not keeping prisoners in Afghanistan has not been respected, has not been fulfilled as it was envisaged in the document that we signed. Therefore, I have written to President Obama that the Afghan people will not allow its government to enter into a security agreement while the United States continues to violate Afghan sovereignty and Afghan laws.
Has President Obama responded to that letter?
He has not. The letter has just been sent. The response will either be in the form of another letter to me by President Obama, or that perhaps we will begin to negotiate this issue in a month from now in our bilateral meetings.
Another issue that will come up eventually, if and when you get past the background detainee situation, will be immunity for U.S. soldiers. From our understanding, we've heard numbers from 14,000 to 20,000 troops that the U.S. wants to continue to stay in Afghanistan after the combat mission ends to train and assist Afghan forces. Would you be willing to give U.S. forces immunity if they stay?
We can consider that question. I can go to the Afghan people and argue for it. But before I do that, the United States of America must make absolutely sure that they respect Afghanistan's sovereignty, that they respect Afghanistan's laws, that no Afghan is hurt or his or her rights violated by US soldiers or by the behavior of the US forces as a whole. Therefore, it comes to the United States making sure that in letter and in practice, it respects Afghanistan's sovereignty. And when I say sovereignty, it encompasses the whole concept of sovereignty. Nothing less than that. And then we can favorably consider all aspects of the US request for a security agreement.
You've mentioned that Afghans have paid a very heavy price in the war here in the last decade. You yourself have paid heavy prices. You've lost loved ones, you've lost family members. Has the U.S. presence in Afghanistan helped or hindered Afghanistan in it becoming more secure?
The arrival of the American forces and the other forces initially in 2001 did help Afghanistan get liberated. That nobody can deny. And for it, we are grateful. The Afghan people joined hands with the international community to liberate ourselves and to free this region and, by extension, the world from extremism and terrorism. And that phase, the Afghan people remember and remember well. Subsequent to that, in the name of the war on terror, the Afghan people have paid the greatest price of any nation. That has not been recognized, that has not been thanked either. This is going to be different. So yes, we have paid a price, and accordingly, if you're speaking in terms of security for the Afghan people, the presence of the United States and its allies has not brought security to the Afghan people. Rather, in instances, it has made that security environment worse for the Afghan people.
There's a lot of talk in America, among the American public. They're also questioning the U.S. presence here in Afghanistan. There have been also American lives and international lives lost here on Afghan soil. What would you say to an American family member who lost a loved one, whether it be a son or a daughter, a husband or a wife? How would you say if their sacrifice was worth it or not?
Well, if they came to help Afghanistan only, help Afghanistan, then the Afghan people are very grateful for the sacrifice that they've done. And we will respect and remember that. But as the US leaders say, you hear it from President Obama, you hear it from other leaders, that the United States is here to protect its own security, to fight Al-Qaeda, to fight terrorism, and that they're not necessarily here for Afghanistan. Then in that fight, the Afghan people have paid a much greater price in terms of blood, in terms of the use of our territory. There, the Afghan people also need to be thanked while we are grateful for the sacrifices of the United States soldiers, the men and women who have served in Afghanistan. We also expect that Afghanistan's sacrifices will be recognized and called with respect. So it depends on the perspective of looking at it. If it's a war on terror, then we've paid a heavy price. We've both paid a price. Afghans have paid a heavier price. But if it's support to Afghanistan, of course we are very grateful and thankful.
So would you say that any of the sacrifices have been worth it in the last decade? As you mentioned, the Afghans have paid a very heavy price.
Heavy price.
And there's been a lot of international blood also spilled on the soil. Were any of these sacrifices worth it, do you think?
It did bring to Afghanistan overall stability. It did take back Afghanistan to its international presence. It did bring Afghanistan a degree of economic well-being. Some people profited more, some did much less. But it did not bring security to Afghanistan. And as I said earlier, in parts of the country, it made it worse.
In the beginning of your presidency, there was a very strong relationship between Afghanistan and the United States. It seems that that relationship has fallen apart. And in the past, you have mentioned that your relationship with President Obama has been tension-ridden. How would you describe your personal relationship with President Obama and also Afghanistan's current relationship with the United States?
Well, my relations with President Obama are not tension-ridden. It's the relation as a whole between Afghanistan and the United States that are full of tensions. And this tension did not begin with the government of President Obama. The tensions began to surface way back, even while the administration before that, during President Bush's time. The tensions in our relations began to surface. We had tensions before that too, but they did not surface. Tensions surfaced in 2007 after the bombardment of villages in Shind and in Herat, where the Afghan government took a public stand where the United States did not like it. So tensions began before that. The relations between us and America has evolved from one of us not knowing them well and not knowing their ways and means of conducting their policy in Afghanistan, and they not recognizing us well or not knowing us well. Now we have measured one another very well. We know how the United States works. We know how it functions. We know what means they use to gain their objectives. So it's more business-like today. It's not based on sentiments or expectations. It's based on us having interests, the United States having an interest, and we're trying to reconcile those interests where both are met.
Do you trust America's motives when it comes to Afghanistan?
Well, we are once beaten, twice shy. We have begun. I think the best way to answer this question is that in international relations there isn't really a question of trust. It's a question of interests. And to the extent that the United States will respect Afghanistan's interests and allow it to flourish, we will have a relationship with America. And the same applies to America, to the extent that we allow their interests to perform, they will begin to have a relationship with us.
When we go to speak about the Taliban, where is Afghanistan in the process of negotiating with the Taliban? Have the Taliban reached out to you or your administration to say that they're willing to negotiate with your government?
We have contact with the Taliban. We've actually had in the past few months quite a wider contact with the Taliban in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and in other countries. The recent visit of the Peace Council's chairman and the members of the council to Pakistan has been a productive one by the standards of the past. Some Taliban were released at the request of the Afghan Peace Council. Subsequent to that, we've had other engagement with Pakistan that has been productive. So yes, both with the Taliban and with Pakistan, as far as the peace process is concerned, things have improved.
You've made it very clear that you will not change the law, you will not run again
Sure.
for presidency in 2014.
Yes.
Where will you go? Will you stay in Afghanistan? Do you feel safe enough to
Yes,
stay in
yes,
Afghanistan?
absolutely. I feel absolutely safe. We'll be staying in Afghanistan. This is my country. And we'll be very happy, and I'll be very happy to be an ex-president.
Would you feel it's a good place for your children to grow up in?
It's a great place for my children to grow. It's the best place for them to grow, sure.
And speaking of your children, congratulations on your baby daughter.
Yeah, she's 7 now. 7 months.
7 months.
7 months. 7 and a half. 7 and a half.
And she has a very strong name, as we mentioned, Malalai, which has
yes.
very strong history with Afghanistan. And as we both know, Afghan women are very strong and very intelligent, as you were married to one, I was raised by one. But unfortunately, the situation for women in Afghanistan as a whole is very dismal. Just last week, a 15-year-old girl was beheaded for saying no to marriage. Another girl was shot going to school. I know that you've passed laws and you've made a constitution to bring equality, but unfortunately, many times throughout the country, those laws aren't abided by. What's your administration doing to help change the culture of perception when it comes to women in Afghanistan, to help the Afghans as a whole to realize that women are worth something and need to be a part of the community?
Well, you're right. The situation for women in Afghanistan has improved considerably. As a matter of fact, just after this interview, I'll have a meeting with a large group of Afghan women who are here to meet with me from the provinces on the peace process. You can join us in that meeting as well. Politically, it has improved a lot for them. Socially and economically, there's a lot more opportunity for them. But the fundamentals, as far as their empowerment is concerned, cannot change quickly because of lack of education, especially among women and girls in the countryside, in the villages. Therefore, Afghanistan, while working hard to bring more progress, more safety, more opportunity to women in Afghanistan, has also to be patient and to work hard to educate more of our young ones for a better tomorrow. Violence is there against our women, as I should say, is in every other society. I don't think Afghanistan is more violent in terms of its social behavior than societies around us or generally. You hear more of violence because there is more awareness of it today, because there is more reporting of it today, because there is more enforcement of the law against violence today. That brings us up for us to notice. Not that violence has increased, no.
Moving on to corruption. Transparency International released their index again yesterday. Afghanistan is tied with North Korea and Somalia as the most corrupt states in the world. It's been an issue that's been talked about for the past several years.
Quite often, yes.
Exactly, quite often. And you've said in the past that it's not just corruption within Afghanistan that's the problem. It's corruption outside as well, within the international community. Can you explain what you mean by that?
There is no doubt that there is corruption in Afghanistan. There is no doubt that there is more corruption than ever before in Afghanistan. But is this corruption the making and the doing of us, the Afghans? Or do others have a role in it? Corruption in Afghanistan is within the Afghan government, more in the delivery of services to people, where the Afghan officials, then those who are corrupt, take bribes or charge. The bigger corruption is the corruption in contracts. The contracts are not issued by the Afghan government. The contracts are issued by the international community, mainly by the United States. Now, whether this corruption in Afghanistan is an accident, a byproduct of the situation in the past 10 years, or is it perpetrated also on purpose, is today my main question. I believe, rather I should say I have come to believe on evidence that part of the corruption is the corruption that naturally comes from the United States through contracts and through the corruption in both systems. But also that the other part of the corruption, or the increasing talk and perception of corruption, is deliberate to render the Afghan government exploitable, to weaken it. This is something that I have begun to believe in firmly now, after the experiences that I've gained in working on this issue. So yes, there is corruption. We are to blame for this corruption, but the international community is to blame many times over for this corruption in Afghanistan. And I don't think, man, that corruption in Afghanistan will reduce in the manner that we wanted, in the manner that the Afghan people wanted, for as long as there is this current format of presence of the American contracts or forces in Afghanistan and their other allies. So we have to wait for 2014 for the withdrawal of international forces, for the reduction in the manner of contracts. Then you will see that Afghanistan will definitely be a lot less a corrupt government and country.
So you do believe that it's the United States and the international community who has perpetrated the corruption?
On evidence, the private security firms, the biggest corrupting factor in this country. In the United States, almost threatened us when we raised the question of the security firms, and when we asked that they be disbanded. They denied success to us for 5 years till we intimidated a public action, and then they came on board. Even then, they tried to retain the contracts that they issue. They're issuing contracts to the kins and relatives of the high-ups in the Afghan government, politicians, parliamentarians, to the Afghan state institutions. Why? I have a letter from General Alam just in the past month that speaks of a contract that they've been giving for the past 10 years to a member of parliament. And now they're complaining that the man is using that money to cause them trouble. Who gave that contract? It wasn't me, it wasn't the Afghan government. It was the US military that gave that contract to the parliamentarian. And there are hundreds of similar examples that we have and that we have spoken about with the US government, where we have only received lip service.
Would you say that the U.S. has been very lazy when it comes to being accountable for the money that they've brought in here, and instead are now pointing the finger at you and your administration?
They have not been lazy. I think they've been quite what word should I use? I think they knew what they were doing.
So it was intentional.
Absolutely intentional.
Interesting. So just to stem a little bit further on this, would you say that part of the U.S. mission here in Afghanistan has been a financial mission rather than just a security mission?
Well, no doubt there was a lot of money taken back to the United States. The money that leaves Afghan airports in cash in billions, whose money is that? It isn't Afghan money.
Also, to touch on the Kabul Bank situation, the Afghan government helped pay to have a survey done to see what happened with the money that went missing. They're pointing the finger at your brother. They're also pointing the finger at the brother of your first vice president. If it was to come, if they were to find out that they were guilty, would you
absolutely
put them on the stand?
Absolutely. The cases are already with the courts. There's no doubt that the Kabul Bank was a corrupt exercise. Was clear, evident stealing of Afghan, depositors' money. Again, on this issue, in a meeting with General Petraeus and the then Deputy Ambassador, who's now the U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, our Minister of Finance, Mr. Sahilwal, told him that there is an encouragement to the outflow of money from this bank to countries outside by an official of the United States Embassy. And then they promised to investigate that, but they never came back to us on that. While Kabul Bank was a clear case of stealing and corruption, in which the Afghan people suffered, in which the Afghan government suffered, we have had no cooperation at all from the United States. Rather, the central bank governor, who assured me in writing and in meetings that the bank was okay, that the bank was good, has been given sanctuary in America. If they want to help Afghanistan fight corruption, they must cooperate, bring the guilty back to Afghanistan.
Has the United States said why they won't bring him back to Afghanistan?
Well, they cite their laws, which isn't true in our view.
We can't avoid the scandal that's going on in the U.S. right now when it comes to two ISAF commanders that have been in Afghanistan. One being General David Petraeus, the other being the current ISAF commander, General John Allen. What went through your mind when you heard about this scandal? These are men that were here and are here to run the NATO security mission, and this scandal has been embarrassing for them. But what went through your mind to know that this may have gone on in your country?
Well, when I heard of that, I thought of the thousands and thousands and thousands of trees that were cut in Afghanistan by these forces, of the tens of thousands of vine trees that were cut, of the orchards destroyed, of the Afghans that suffered during those years.
And it must have angered you.
Definitely. That destruction, definitely.
You've worked with many ISAF commanders throughout the years. Is there one in particular that you feel worked well in Afghanistan as opposed to others who actually wanted to help the Afghan people and that you felt you could work with?
There was General Crystal that worked very well with us. Before that, there was, I cannot, bring his name back to my memory. A very nice person who was the first U.S. commander in Afghanistan and then served again here in Afghanistan. Was also a very, very good person with whom we had a good relationship, who actually saw the suffering of the Afghan people, and who, in a meeting in the room, in case of a civilian casualty, that he felt what the people told him that he was a Catholic and that he knew suffering as was taught him by God that it was wrong. So there were some who worked very well here in Afghanistan.
General Petraeus has been put on a pedestal in America. He was revered as the one who helped the war in Iraq, and he was seen in America as well as a great commander here in Afghanistan. But as you mentioned, when you heard about the scandal, you thought about the destruction in Kandahar. Would you agree that he was a great commander for Afghanistan?
Ma'am, it will be unfair of me to speak of a person who's no longer in office. I wouldn't do that.
Okay. And I'm going to touch on one more thing. I know that you've given us a lot of your time, and I apologize for taking too much of your time. You have been here from the start of the war, and it sounds like you'll be here till the end and beyond. When you look back at 2001 and 2002 and what you envision for Afghanistan today, how has that changed, or has that been accomplished? Is what you envisioned what you see today?
What I envision for Afghanistan, a lot has been accomplished. And that a lot that has been accomplished with the help of the US taxpayers' money, with the help of the United States people's hard work, and with the help of our other friends and allies. Education, better health, better economy, roads, airports, Afghanistan having a presence all over the international community. That has been accomplished. Our democracy, our free media, part of it entirely. Our own doing part of it with the help of the international community and the United States of America. But the greatest pain to me today and in the future will be the suffering of the Afghan people in military operations in the name of the war on terror. The attacks of terrorism, the attacks by the Taliban on our children and our women and our girls, and the attacks of the US military and NATO on our people in the name of the war on terror. Just before yesterday, we had the report I got today and yesterday of a girl who was shot in Kapisa. We are trying to find out whether this was the Taliban or just culprits. So there's a price that Afghans have paid, a heavy price.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And thank you so much for speaking with NBC News.
خوش آمدید.